Wow, I remember this set of photos from the time, and now I look back on them, they're even worse than I thought then. They are among the most photographed and talked about women in the world. Their contrasting styles and personalities were said to be key to the future of the British royal family. Instead, Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, had such an unpleasant fallout that neither are on speaking terms. Neither Catherine nor Meghan were siblings or heirs to the throne, but both princes value their wives above all others. They were their anchors after fractured upbringings and their shelter from the storms of royal life and public opinion. The differences between the wives cemented the split between the brothers and hardened the resolve of both sides. In this video, I'm going to look at how it happened through the sometimes incredibly awkward pictures of them together over the years. This picture was taken at a time of great optimism. You can almost see it in the closeness there that, the nation was waiting for the birth of Catherine's baby and they're looking forward to the wedding of Harry and Meghan. In this picture, you can see them outside church at Sandringham. Their heads are bowed, or the women are preparing a curtsy because Queen Elizabeth is about to arrive. And it really symbolises their happiness, that spirit of optimism that we had back then. In this picture, there's no hint of any trouble to come. What we do see as well is the outfits that the women are wearing. Meghan spoke in her Netflix series with Prince Harry about how she had to wear subdued colours when she was a member of the royal family, so as not to cause any difference between her and Queen Elizabeth, not to outshine her. Here we see her in a camel-coloured coat, and it was, if I remember rightly, it was her hat that attracted a lot of interest. For rather unkind reasons, you could say that it was compared to a certain emoji. This is the first time really that we'd seen them pictured together, and it was fascinating at the time to observe their chemistry between each other. Now we move on to their first public appearance together and the moment when they were christened the Fab Four by the media. Now, members of the royal family generally carry out engagements separately, and it is rare to see so many together. So you can imagine the interest that this created, having these four young, glamorous members of the royal family together at this same press conference, which was to publicise the Royal Foundation, which Harry was a member of and which Meghan was due to join as well. Look at the body language here. In the first of our Reading the Royals episodes, we talked about the relationship between William and Harry, but it's even more interesting to look at the relationship between Meghan and Catherine. To me, when I look at this picture, they all look quite awkward, particularly William and Harry with those expressions. You can almost see them biting their lips. But the only one who seems to be absolutely delighted to be there is Meghan. She looks pleased as punch with that expression. And I think it looks like she really did feel, this is my moment, I'm joining the firm, and I'm gonna be the boss. The pictures people would have seen online and in the following day's newspapers would have been positive. The Mail pointed out that all eyes were on the pair, sitting centre stage and smiling constantly. Catherine, who was by this stage heavily pregnant with Prince Louis, smiled and clapped when Meghan was introduced by William. But the mood was nervous and slightly tense, with none of them really looking like they wanted to be there. One reason could have been what Meghan was saying. As my colleague Rebecca English said in her report at the time, Meghan also showed she has no intention of steering away from controversy, as she championed female empowerment and a bold public endorsement of the Me Too and Time's Up campaigns against sex harassment and inequality. Honourable causes, but a clear potential clash with politicians, which is the last thing the royal family want. You do wonder if a line in William's speech where he said, "The task for us would not be to reinvent the wheel," could have been aimed at his soon-to-be sister-in-law. We later learned from Prince Harry's book Spare that there had been an awkward moment backstage when Meghan had asked to borrow Catherine's lip gloss. He describes how Catherine was taken aback by this, eventually found some and grimaced when Meghan squeezed some out. Harry put it down to a small clash of styles and then blamed the media for sensing something was up and trying to turn it into something bigger. To me, it sounds like it was getting bigger by itself, Harry. At the time, the optimists among us put the strained expressions and forced smiles down to nerves, or at worst, teething difficulties. But as we'll find out, things really were bad and about to get worse. To the wedding of Harry and Meghan now. And what should have been a very happy family occasion for all was anything but for Catherine. There she is, holding the hand of Princess Charlotte, who was one of the flower girls. And remember that Catherine had given birth, so being on public display and so much in the spotlight, would have been stressful. And also William was acting as best man, so, he wasn't there. She was very much on her own, looking after the children. Look at Catherine's face. She's almost unrecognisable from the, relaxed, happy Catherine we know. The most likely explanation for this is her rows with the emotional bride before the event. Princess Charlotte was a bridesmaid, and it is generally accepted that there was a row over her outfit in the run-up to the big day. Catherine, who would have been exhausted after the birth of Prince Louis, and according to Tom Bower, Catherine was already cross with Meghan over her treatment of staff. Claims Meghan denies, by the way. And Catherine was unhappy with how the bridesmaids' outfits were handled. Meghan claims Catherine made her cry, but of course Catherine would never speak publicly about this herself. Other stories, though, suggest it was Meghan who made her cry. There was also the suggestion that Meghan had said Kate was suffering from baby brain when there was a mix-up with a pre-wedding meeting. Harry claims Catherine said, "You talked about my hormones. We are not close enough for you to talk about my hormones." Catherine brought a bunch of flowers to try to mend the relationship, but that only served to paper over the cracks of what was becoming an ever deeper rift. Back to the pictures, and one of the shots that I think is most striking is this one. I mean, look at how the bride and groom seem to be talking to each other, but the guests are talking among themselves. Rather than focusing on the bride and groom, William and Catherine are talking to each other. King Charles is chatting away to Meghan's mother, Doria, but it seems very much that the focus was not on the bride and groom. You can only wonder why it was that Catherine didn't want to look at the happy couple that day, and I suspect it's because of a lot of what had gone on before. With the wedding and honeymoon out of the way, Catherine and Meghan were brought together at Trooping the Colour. So at Trooping the Colour, it was one of those events where very much a reminder to Meghan of what her status would be in the royal family. Whereas she may have been hoping for a, leading role, here it was clear that she'd be playing a secondary role. She'd have to be standing behind Catherine. And she does look quite awkward in that position. I mean, look at their expressions. They look as if they're trying to look away from each other. They look uncomfortable in each other's presence, frankly. Meghan peering out from behind an uncomfortable-looking Catherine did seem to sort of set the tone for their relationship in future. Despite the very difficult start to their relationship, Catherine extended the hand of friendship to her sister-in-law in July of that year by inviting her to the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. This was a big deal. Catherine is patron of the All England Tennis Club, and so an invitation to Wimbledon from her showed how much she was making an effort with that relationship with Meghan. I think you can, however, see in here the strain on their faces. It doesn't look really like they were having a relaxed afternoon watching the tennis together. Catherine's expression, it's far from that. Usually when you see her watching the tennis, she'll be looking totally relaxed. It's her sort of happy place. Whereas here, she looks strained, as if she's making the effort. She knows she's going to be photographed, but she doesn't seem to be enjoying being there with Meghan at all. In his book, Revenge, Tom Bower writes, Meghan's smile looked more forced than usual. The physical comparison was unflattering to Meghan. On her own, Meghan's radiance won universal applause, but beside the taller, authoritative future queen, the Duchess appeared diminished. Neither could conceal their mutual discomfort. Bower also points out that despite this show of friendship, it was an unhappy summer for the two couples. The then Cambridges refused to stay with Charles and Camilla at the Castle of May when the Sussexes were there, and in turn, Harry and Meghan rejected an invitation to Balmoral. The then Duchesses couldn't avoid each other at the wedding of Princess Eugenie and Jack Brooksbank in October 2018. Looking back at these pictures, it's surprising how often we see Meghan looking at Catherine. Instead of looking at the happy couple that day, Meghan's eyes seem to be directed entirely towards Catherine. Again, we see William and Catherine at the front, reflecting their position in the royal family. And then Harry and Meghan standing awkwardly behind. And look who's next to Meghan as well. That's Princess Michael of Kent. Now you might remember that she felt the need to apologise to Meghan after the first occasion that they met. It was a Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace, and she wore an offensive brooch to that lunch, and she felt she had to apologise for that afterwards. The Commonwealth Day service was particularly important to the late Queen Elizabeth, and all the royals would know to be on their best behaviour. It might also be why this was chosen as another day when Catherine wanted to try to make things up. We see the pair kiss on both cheeks at the start of the event. Vanity Fair revealed that a palace source said this was deliberate. Catherine wanted to end months of rumours of a feud. And we can see in this embrace, it's pretty awkward. We've got Catherine kissing Meghan on both cheeks, and Meghan sort of putting her arm around as if she wants to embrace Catherine. But look at that, it's not really being reciprocated. It's not really an embrace. It's a sort of awkward grab almost. I think as public shows displays of affection go, it's not the most convincing. This photograph though does illustrate how Catherine is a peacemaker and wanted to try to calm things down really. I mean, remember that this was the last engagement before Prince Archie was born. It was the last engagement before their household split between Harry and Meghan's and William and Catherine's. So it really shows her intention to try to mend fences between them. And this was another event that emphasised that Harry and Meghan would be on the second row behind William and Catherine. And look at Meghan there, seated next to Prince Andrew. Looking back, she'd probably think that is a reflection of the status she was given. Wow, I remember this set of photos from the time, and now I look back on them, they're even worse than I thought then. Now these pictures were taken at a polo match. It was a charity polo match that William and Harry were both playing in. It was a few months after the birth of baby Archie. It's at the Guards Club in Windsor Great Park. And I think the idea at the time was to, it was seen as a bit of an opportunity to show how Catherine and Meghan were friendly and were getting on. But my goodness, when you look at it, the body language was just terrible. The whole set of photographs that I saw, there's no interaction whatsoever between the two women. I mean, Meghan is clutching baby Archie to her chest almost as a sort of shield. Catherine is looking in a different direction the entire time, keeping an eye on her own children, no doubt. But even though the pictures were taken over the course of, quite a period, there's no engagement between the women at all. And it's worth remembering the context of the photograph as well, that by this time, the two households had split. They'd moved in their different directions, and they were setting up their separate courts, essentially. Remember that in the royal family, their job is to make small talk. It's to be able to interact with anyone, any member of public. They always have something nice to say. But here you've got them in private at this event with clearly nothing to say to each other. It's a photograph that really does speak volumes. According to the book Finding Freedom, which takes a very pro-Sussexes stance, this event was an example of the cordial but distant rapport between Meghan and Catherine, and how the women hadn't become friends. To me, even cordial seems a bit too optimistic. The complete set of photos has none where the pair are looking at each other. It seemed like a day to forget all round, as even Harry, who loves playing polo, looked annoyed as he, Meghan and Archie walked away. In July 2019, Catherine very magnanimously extended the invitation again to Meghan to join her at the tennis. But this year she brought her sister Pippa along, perhaps as a buffer. Remember, this is Catherine's favourite event of the year. But once again, her body language suggests that it's anything but. She's stiff and uncomfortable as she arrives, as though this is purely duty, not pleasure. And you can only wonder if that's the prospect of spending the day with someone who makes her feel uncomfortable. Look at the expression on Catherine's face. She looks very strained. And she's really, gripping her handbag as if it's some sort of shield to protect her. It does not look like a relaxed afternoon enjoying the tennis at all, but very much like an engagement that she has to carry out because it's her duty. We're back at the Commonwealth Day service, this time in 2020, and it seems that the royals have largely given up on trying to pretend that all is well. We haven't seen any pictures of the couples together since the previous November at the Remembrance Day events at the Cenotaph. Other than a strained hello when they arrived, there isn't really any interaction between William and Catherine and Harry and Meghan at this event. We can see how Prince Edward and his wife Sophie, were almost acting as a buffer between the two couples. Here we have Edward and Sophie, chatting in a friendly way to William and Catherine in front of them, but Harry and Meghan, again seated on the row behind, look very uncomfortable. They're not engaging at all. And my goodness, look at that stiff expression on Meghan's face. It's as if, she's got that stiff jaw. She's sort of thinking, I've got to get through this. And Harry sort of giving her concerned glances. Are you okay, Meghan? It seems like it really was a day that they just wanted to grin and bear. Harry and Meghan have been to Africa and Canada as they start to explore the possibility of life outside the royal family. So you might remember there'd been a real row about the order of service before the event, that it had been written and printed, and there was no mention of Harry and Meghan at all in the Queen's procession. And in order to diffuse the row, Prince William agreed that he and Catherine wouldn't take part in that procession either. Robert Lacey writes in his book Battle of the Brothers, when Harry heard that he and Meghan were to be so graphically shunted aside on this final appearance, he was furious. The subservience of a spare, one of the basic reasons for this very sad parting of the ways, could not have been more strikingly illustrated. In Finding Freedom, it confirms that Harry and Meghan were disappointed. The decision had been made without their consultation, and they were informed long after the 2,000 orders of service had been printed for guests, with their names notably absent. This year it would be just the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall walking through the Abbey with the monarch. It felt intentional. A source close to the Sussexes was also reported in the book saying it should have been the one public moment where the royal family put their arms around the couple for a show of support. They purposefully chose not to put them in the procession and not to be welcoming. It was most unpleasant. Some might argue it was a little rich of the Sussexes to complain of unpleasantness. After all, they were the ones who'd announced that they were quitting royal duties. In their Netflix documentary, Harry and Meghan confirmed that this was the first time that they had seen the other members of the royal family since the news was announced that they were leaving. Harry confirmed that, "I felt really distant from the rest of my family," which was interesting because so much of how they operate is about what it looks like rather than what it feels like, he continued. And it looked cold, but it also felt cold. Remarkably, it took the death of Queen Elizabeth more than 2 years later before we saw Catherine and Meghan photographed next to each other again. They say that absence makes the heart grow fonder. If anything, it's the opposite here. They would have seen each other, but not spoken at the incredibly awkward Jubilee service for the Queen, where Harry questioned the seating plan, which seemed, many would say understandably, to relegate them to the less senior members of the royal family. Here, as the world mourned the death of the Queen, William and Harry's wives came out to support them as they met well-wishers. Given that the brothers were born royal, you might have expected them to be on the outside, nearest the crowd. Plus, knowing that the brothers had fallen out so spectacularly, you might have thought that it would be the wives who were next to each other. But the opposite is true. The brothers share a couple of words, but Catherine wants to be physically separate from Meghan. At the first opportunity, the two couples split to go and talk to different sections of the crowd, where some even booed the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Robert Jobson revealed in his book Our King that despite the show of unity and the hint of reconciliation that it gave to optimistic royal watchers, this was just an illusion. He said the occasion was very difficult for a visibly uncomfortable Meghan. He also revealed that it was worse for Catherine. Catherine later admitted to a senior royal that such was the ill feeling between the two couples, the joint walkabout was one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do. Shortly after this meeting, the pair would be seen together for the last time in years at the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This was a huge global event with the world's cameras on the family. At such a moving event, you would expect somber expressions, and you wouldn't expect much interaction anyway. But the body language is striking. Camilla, the new queen, is in between them. Kate simultaneously keeping her family close and away from their Aunt Meghan. But the body language is striking. Remember, these last two events, the walkabout and the funeral, both took place before Harry's hugely controversial book Spare was published. If it was difficult for the parties to be seen together then, you suspect that sadly any sort of reunion would be impossible now. You can make up your own minds as to who caused the rift or who made who cry over the bridesmaids' outfits. But I'll leave you with this thought. Meghan has a history of fractured relationships. Friends, family members and employees cast aside when things go wrong. Catherine, by contrast, has remained close to her family. Her friend group has remained very similar, while former staff members remain extremely loyal. Take from that what you will, but it's worth remembering that it must have taken a huge provocation for anyone to fall out in this way. What we now know is that there'd been a series of rows. And just look at what's going on here in these photographs. You know, we've got William looking down a lot. When he wasn't actually meeting the crowds, he didn't seem to want to meet Harry's glance at all. He was either looking at the floor or looking away. He kept his distance pretty much at all times from Harry. Now you just look back to think, God, how didn't we actually pick up on that? The fact that Prince William and Prince Harry fell out, we all know. But what isn't so well known is how long ago the fallout began and how for years they presented a front to the world, despite increasingly disliking and distrusting each other. So I thought it would be interesting to go through some key images of William and Harry together, take a closer look at them, reveal what was going on behind the scenes at the time, and compare what we thought then to what we know now. The first picture I want to talk about is actually the first royal story that I ever wrote. It was on the front page and it was about Prince Harry starting at Eton College back in 1998. Now you might think there'd be lots of photos of Harry and William together at Eton, but actually this is the only one of them together. You can see in this very formal portrait that was taken, their father, now King Charles, is sitting there in the very regal, formal pose, while his sons are much more relaxed with their legs open. Harry looks a little nervous, but Eton was a big thing for Harry. Harry's best friend, Henry van Strabenzie, known as Henners, had been with him throughout his prep school at Ludgrove, but he'd gone to a different school now, so Harry felt very much on his own, and he was hoping that going into the same house at Eton, Manor House, with his brother, would be a chance for them to bond. But actually when he got there, he found that William didn't want to know. Harry told Anderson Cooper in an interview, "At the time it hurt. I couldn't make sense of it. I was like, what do you mean? We're now at the same school. Like I haven't seen you for ages. Now we get to hang out together." He's like, no, when we're at school, we don't know each other. And I took that personally. I think the problem here was that William was well established at school. You know, he'd been there for a couple of years, and he'd made his friends, and frankly it was a bit embarrassing to have his younger brother sort of pestering him, and he was enjoying that independence. So in some ways perhaps he resented the arrival of his little brother. As many of us who've had siblings at the same school will recognise, you know, you can feel a bit resentful if you've got to look after your little brother or little sister, and you might feel a bit embarrassed, but not many of us go on to complain about this in a book as Harry did, or in a series of interviews. Next we have a photograph of William and Harry at the wedding of their father, then Prince Charles, in 2005 to Camilla Parker Bowles. Now in this photograph they look reasonably happy and dutiful, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes. The wedding came after years of their stepmother Camilla being portrayed as, you know, sort of wicked stepmother. In his memoirs, Harry writes about how difficult it was to be introduced to Camilla, that eventually he did because he wanted to make his father happy. And he told him, look, we're happy for you to have this relationship with Camilla, but please promise us that you'll never get married. So you can understand their mixed feelings at the wedding. And as for the relationship between William and Harry, behind the smiles, there were difficult things going on. The wedding came a couple of months after a fiasco over a fancy dress party. The theme was colonials and natives, and Harry infamously had chosen to wear the uniform of a Nazi officer. Now, he'd chosen that uniform, he claimed, with the consent of William and Catherine, and he claims in his memoirs that he was encouraged to choose that uniform. But then it all went wrong when a photograph was published on the front page of a newspaper, and it was published under the headline, "Harry the Nazi." And it caused an absolute storm and a real crisis for the royal family. The publication was awful timing because it coincided with an anniversary of the Holocaust, and that added to the hurt. Now, these next photographs are really important in Harry and William's relationship and in their development. These pictures were taken as part of a sort of PR drive when William and Harry were training to be helicopter pilots together in Shropshire at RAF Shawbury. It was unusual for them to be training together. They were living together, and understandably, the royal family wanted to make much of this. The royal family's links to the military can't be underestimated. They're incredibly important. So the PR value of these photographs was really high. In the video that was taken, there was lots of joking between the brothers, and it was seen as a sign of their warm, really close, friendly relationship. There was lots of fraternal banter. William was making quite a few jokes at his brother's expense about how Harry was a bit of a slob to live with. He snored at night, and it all seemed very good-natured, and it really was one of those things that made the public love these brothers. Now, in his memoirs, Harry says that he laughed at these jokes at the time, but looking back, he thinks there might have been something else at play here, that Harry was going to be able to go to war, which was something he was very much looking forward to. But William, because of his position as a future king, wasn't going to be allowed. And Harry thinks that there was resentment coming through at that, and he wonders if that sort of underlies some of William's comments. Now, in all the pictures published at the time and in the video, the brothers look very happy together. They're laughing, they're smiling. But actually, in some other pictures that weren't necessarily given due prominence at the time, Harry doesn't look so happy. There's a bit of resentment seems to be creeping in, a few sort of scowls at the camera, and I wonder if, with hindsight, there was a lot of significance in those. Personally, I'm not so sure. I think it's far more innocent. It was what it seemed at the time. It was jokey banter between siblings, something, we all know about. My next photograph is a really important one. It kind of symbolises the trio of Harry, William and Catherine that we came to love so much. Their closeness, the friendliness, the joking. This was at the launch of a very important venture. All three of them wanted to help change attitudes towards mental health. They thought people were far too hung up, they were too shy about talking about these issues, and their initiatives have played a big part in changing attitudes. This is the launch of their mental health initiative, Heads Together, in 2016. Despite their apparently happy and jovial appearance together, behind the scenes, Harry said his own mental health was suffering. He'd been going through very awkward panic attacks, and he felt that William wasn't sympathetic. To quote from Harry's memoirs, Spare, "After one speech, which couldn't be avoided or cancelled, and during which I'd nearly fainted, Willie came up to me backstage, laughing. 'Harold, look at you, you're drenched.' I couldn't fathom his reaction. Him of all people. He'd been present for my very first panic attack. With Kate, we were driving out to a polo match in Gloucestershire in their Range Rover. I was in the back and Willie peered at me in the rear view. He saw me sweating, red-faced. 'You all right, Harold?' No, I wasn't. He knew something was up, something bad. He told me that day or soon after that I needed help. And now he was teasing me? I couldn't imagine how he could be so insensitive." We're never likely to hear William or Catherine's version of events, of course, but I suspect that what William would point out is that he helped Harry. He said to him, "Look, I think you need to get help," and Harry's acknowledged that in the past. I suspect William's light-hearted comments were just his natural way of trying to diffuse the situation and make Harry feel less self-conscious about it. Now, next we have a key photograph, and quite an unusual one. It's a picture of William and Catherine with Harry, and then with Meghan, after she became engaged to Harry and was due to marry into the royal family. It's really the first and only photograph of them promoting the Royal Foundation. Now, this is the charity which was extended to include Meghan And it became seen as the Fab Four was how the press reported it at the time. The body language at this press conference, has to be said, was awkward. On the face of it, they were all smiles, but you didn't have to look too hard to see some of the awkwardness. At the time, we put some of this awkwardness down to just the fact that Meghan was new, there was a bit of shyness, it was their first appearance together, but with hindsight, we now know there were genuine tensions behind the scenes. Robert Lacey said in his book, "Working together as a family came one of the questions. Do you ever have disagreements about things?" Cue nervous laughter. The two women looked at the ground saying nothing, using their hair to hide their faces, and their true emotions, presumably. Harry held on to Meghan for some mutual support, and it was William who said quite directly, "Oh yes," inspiring Harry then to add that the clashes came thick and fast. Had these disagreements been resolved, the questioner persisted, to which William replied facetiously, "We don't know." Meghan started talking a lot about how the foundation's work might extend to the women's empowerment movement. No one made the point at the time, because a month before, a $13 million legal defense fund had been created in the US, linked to Me Too and Time's Up, seeking legislation to discipline and punish companies that tolerated sexual harassment. Legislation meant politics, a big royal no-no. When Meghan was making her comments about women's empowerment, there was even more awkwardness than at other times. And it became clear during this press conference that Meghan was going to be different and perhaps difficult, that she was going to be veering off script and would be taking the royal family in directions that they might not necessarily feel comfortable with. Now, these next photographs are absolutely fascinating. These are of the walkabout that William did with Harry at Windsor to greet the crowds the evening before Harry and Meghan's wedding in 2018. Now, at the time, we saw them together, we thought it was a great gesture. It was something that had happened before other royal weddings, and it seemed like a generous way to thank the crowds for coming, and any kind of slightly odd body language we might put down to pre-wedding nerves or a bit of tensions. But actually, what we now know is that there'd been a series of rows. And just look at what's going on here in these photographs. You know, we've got William looking down a lot. When he wasn't actually meeting the crowds, he didn't seem to want to meet Harry's glance at all. He was either looking at the floor or looking away. He kept his distance pretty much at all times from Harry. Now you just look back to think, God, how didn't we actually pick up on that? What we now know from what Harry has said in interviews and from in his memoirs is that there are a series of serious rows in the run-up to the wedding. We all know about the row between Meghan and Catherine about the outfits that the flower girls were going to wear, including Princess Charlotte. In the Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan claimed that Catherine had made her cry, but others dispute this vigorously and suggest it was the other way round. But there were a series of other arguments as well. One was actually about whether Harry could wear a beard, which he enjoyed wearing for the wedding. William wasn't happy with this because apparently he hadn't been allowed. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had told him he couldn't have a beard for his own wedding because that wasn't tradition and officers didn't have beards at that point. And in his memoirs, Harry relates, at one point, William actually ordered me, as the heir speaking to the spare, to shave. Another of these rows was about a pre-wedding dinner that Harry had invited William to attend, but William had said, oh, he couldn't, and he made an excuse about family commitments, which didn't convince Harry. And then he said that William had only agreed to join this walkabout at Windsor after being told to by their grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. Obviously, Harry was very resentful about all of this. But look, William did have a family by that point. He did have commitments, so it wasn't as easy as it was in the old days. But looking at these pictures again and knowing what we do know now, you know, it does make me wonder, is William's reservations coming through about this wedding? Perhaps that Harry was making a mistake. Now, if you look at this photograph from the wedding itself, in some ways, William looks even more serious than the groom. I mean, he's looking down the aisle at Meghan's arrival, but again, you do wonder what was going through William's head at that point. And there were more rows to come at the wedding reception. It later emerged that Harry and Meghan were furious that William and Catherine had changed their places at the dinner because they weren't happy with the seating plan. So Harry and Meghan had put couples sitting next to each other in the American tradition, whereas William and Catherine preferred the long-standing British tradition of separating couples so that they could speak to different people. In Harry's memoirs Spare, he says, "For our part, we chipped in that we weren't too pleased when Willie and Kate switched place cards and changed seats at our wedding. We'd followed the American tradition, placing couples next to each other, but Willie and Kate didn't like that tradition, so their table was the only one where spouses were apart. They insisted it wasn't them, it was someone else." Whatever the truth of it, what should have been a happy day turned into rows, and it marked a new low in the relationship between the two couples. 6 months after Harry and Meghan's wedding, tensions were already starting to show between the two couples. This photograph is of them leaving Westminster Abbey after a service to mark Armistice Day. And at the time, we might have thought their seriousness was because of the nature of the event, that they would always look very somber. But actually there was a lot going on behind the scenes. There was a reminder at this event of the order of things for Harry and Meghan, because they were seated on the second row, behind William and Catherine, who were on the front row with Queen Elizabeth and with Prince Charles and Camilla. I haven't noticed this before, but just look at their jaws in this photograph. My goodness, they look tense. It's far from a sort of portrait of a relaxed family together. And this lack of warmth between them came after reports began to emerge that the two courts of William and Catherine and Harry and Meghan would be splitting. This was a huge story because everything previously they had done together, their royal foundation, their officers were all together. But these reports suggested that all wasn't well, and it would later be confirmed that they were going to separate, and it was the first sign of the formal separation between the two households. Before then, we had this formal portrait to mark Charles's 70th birthday. And when you look at it, it looks very light-hearted, informal, there's smiling faces. But we know actually that neither brother wanted to make time to appear in it because tensions had already got so bad. By Christmas 2018, the split was terminal, and the footage we're about to see really did make royal watchers sit up and take notice. Look at the body language as they're leaving church on Christmas Day in Sandringham. Meghan looks as if she wants to talk to Prince William, but he sort of turns away awkwardly and fiddles with his scarf. Looks like he just doesn't want to speak to Meghan at all. And then at that point, it seems Catherine intervenes. As we've seen so often with her, she seems to be sort of the peacemaker and trying to make a bit of small talk, knowing full well that the cameras are all on them. The photographs that filled the newspapers were of an apparently united front between the then Cambridges, William and Catherine, and the Sussexes, Harry and Meghan. And this apparent coldness between William and Meghan makes more sense if you think what happened before. I mean, these images come shortly after the infamous dog bowl brawl, as we now call it, at Nottingham Cottage in London. This was when William came round to speak to Harry, and he told his brother what he really felt about Meghan. He called her difficult and rude, and this sparked this fight apparently where Harry says he was hit by William and he was left with an injury. After that, as we now know, the fallout became more public and more vicious, and with those floodgates opened, there was no going back for William and Harry. Look how just angry really Harry looks there at the back. The others are trying to sort of put on very neutral expressions, but he looks angry and bitter. Everyone looks pretty unhappy, essentially, apart from, I dare say, Meghan. Look at the expression on her face. She seems kind of pleased, really, as if maybe she's got what she wanted. There were people at the time who said, perhaps that's what Meghan wanted. She's married into the royal family, she's got her prince, and now she's taking him back to America. Despite the whirlwind of drama surrounding Meghan Markle's relationship with the royal family, one steadfast ally emerged, Queen Elizabeth. In a series of unprecedented gestures, Her Majesty went above and beyond to welcome the American actress into the fold, creating a bond that many found surprising. But how did that relationship weather Meghan's criticism and public attacks on the monarchy? Here, I'll analyse key moments between the Queen and Meghan and reveal what they tell us about their relationship. Christmas 2017 was a pivotal moment for Meghan Markle, showcasing the extraordinary lengths the Queen would go in order to make her feel welcome into the royal family. Up until that point, no new members of the royal family had been invited to join until after they were married. But this was Christmas, several months before Harry and Meghan's wedding. So to invite her into the fold was very significant. In Harry and Meghan's Netflix docuseries, Meghan said, "I remember so vividly the first Christmas at Sandringham, calling my mum and she's like, 'How's it going?' And I said, 'Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's just like a big family, like I've always wanted.' And there was just this constant movement and energy and fun." And we heard this from Prince Harry too in a radio interview in Britain, where he talked about how Meghan had really found a second family and really felt extremely welcome. And obviously this is in huge contrast to what we heard from them later in the Oprah Winfrey interview and in the Netflix series. Now this is another important moment and another sign of the Queen welcoming Meghan. It's an engagement at Commonwealth Day service in March, which the Queen had made a point of inviting Meghan to, even though she wasn't yet married into the royal family. Again, it was unusual. Generally, people would have to wait until they'd married before they were invited, but it was the Queen's sign that you're ready. I think also it was a reference to Meghan's age and her maturity, that she felt, she's an established figure, she's an actress, she's not someone like Princess Diana or Catherine who was younger and less experienced. She really felt that here was someone who was ready to join the firm immediately. Now we turn to the big day itself in May 2018 at St George's Chapel, Windsor. At the time, the country was full of excitement and anticipation, but since then we've learnt about various tensions in the build-up to the big day. One of those apparently was over the menu, that there'd been some dispute over one of the dishes being prepared for the wedding banquet. According to Katie Nicholl of Vanity Fair, Meghan had been tasting the dishes, and one dish that was meant to be vegan, she complained smelt of egg. And apparently at this point, suddenly the Queen walked in and said, "Meghan, in this family, we don't speak to people like that." And that was a sign of the tensions. Meghan was an actress. She's probably used to speaking to staff in quite an abrupt way. But in the royal family, servants, they're almost part of the family. In some cases, like the Queen's right-hand woman, Angela Kelly, they're almost like a sister or a daughter to Her Majesty. Even Meghan's bridal gown was apparently the cause of some dispute. Remember, Meghan was a divorcee and the Queen was apparently surprised that she was choosing to wear a white dress. According to the royal author Ingrid Seward, in her book Mother and I, Lady Elizabeth Anson, who was a cousin and close confidant of the Queen, claims the Queen said Meghan's wedding dress was too white. In the Queen's opinion, it wasn't appropriate for a divorcee getting remarried in a church to look quite so flamboyantly virginal. Now this is a lovely photograph and really symbolic. What we see here is then Prince Charles walking Meghan down the aisle. You might remember that he met her halfway. She chose to walk the first half on her own, a very sort of symbolic gesture. People interpreted that as a feminist gesture. And then she was met halfway by Charles. And the reason for this was that her own father, Thomas Markle, had been due to walk her down the aisle as tradition dictates, but he'd pulled out. He'd been taken ill with heart problems, and so Charles had kindly agreed to step in. But interestingly, Ingrid Seward, the royal author, claims that the Queen didn't really approve of this, that she felt uncomfortable with it. She doesn't really explain in what way, but I suspect it was just because the Queen felt that it should be Meghan's father who took that role, or no one, I guess. Now look at this. You can see the Queen's face and Prince Philip looking very curious. This picture was taken during the sermon, which was given by Bishop Michael Curry, an American bishop, who Meghan had asked if he would give the sermon. He was quite a well-known figure. And he gave a very vivid sermon on the power of love was his theme, but it did go on a bit. I mean, tradition in Britain is that sermons tend to be no more than about 6 minutes. And at first, the royal family seemed to be enjoying it. They were, perhaps it was more lively oration than they were used to. But then it started to drag on a bit. And then you saw them exchange glances with, I remember seeing Camilla at one point sort of grimacing slightly and exchanging sort of knowing glances. But here the Queen does look a bit fed up. It actually ended up going on for 14 minutes. So you can understand them getting a bit impatient, and certainly Prince Philip, I suspect, seems to be seeing the funny side. Ah yes, now this is the tiara, which looks beautiful there on Meghan's head, but it was, we later learned, a source of some arguments. I think it was Robert Jobson who first revealed in his book that there'd been some real tensions about which tiara Meghan was going to wear. This was because it was the Queen's aide and right-hand woman Angela Kelly who was in charge of the Queen's jewellery. And the Queen said that Meghan could wear a tiara and gave her a choice, but the arrangements for choosing one had been quite difficult, and there seemed to be some argument over it. It wasn't quite clear. But then in Prince Harry's memoirs Spare, he confirmed it all. He said there had been a big row, and essentially it was because they felt that Angela Kelly was getting too big for her boots. She was not turning up, she was not agreeing to dates when they thought Meghan could see them, and it was a sign that, full of sort of bitterness really, that Harry felt that Meghan wasn't being treated as she should, that everyone should show her great respect, and here was a servant, as he saw it, who was just being quite difficult and obstructive, and it was one of those things that really sort of set a bad tone for the marriage and their relationship with the royal family. The thing about tiaras is they are quite complicated to wear, and you need to have a fitting first. In this case, Meghan wanted to try it on when her hairdresser was visiting. I think time was pushing on, and probably messages that got sent from her and Harry to the palace, annoyed Angela Kelly with their tone. So they certainly had difficulty arranging a date, and that seemed to be at the heart of the problem. Now here we are on the balcony at Buckingham Palace for Trooping the Colour, very soon after Harry and Meghan's wedding. And we can see how, yes, Meghan is behind William and Catherine, Harry there at the back, but she's there centre stage, and this was her first taste of being a married woman in the royal family. Now here we have a very important day in the relationship between the Queen and Meghan. The Queen made a point of inviting Meghan to accompany her on a day of engagements in Cheshire. I think she thought it would be a great way to bond with a new member of the royal family and to show how important she was. The chemistry seemed to be great. You could tell that the Queen was making an effort. There she is laughing. They were watching various things happening that day, sharing jokes to one another. You can see Meghan probably making a joke there, and they were both putting an effort into it. I mean, what's striking to me as well is the outfits. You see the Queen there in her distinctive bright colour. I mean, look at it, it's almost neon. And then we see Meghan, who, as we later learned, she said that she'd been advised to wear sort of subdued colours, not to try and compete with the Queen, so we see that here. But overall, it was really a sign of the effort that the Queen was putting in. I mean, this was acknowledged even when Meghan had soon become disillusioned. She acknowledged the efforts that the Queen had made. For example, in her interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021, she recalled, "The Queen, for example, has always been wonderful to me. I mean, we had one of our first joint engagements together. She asked me to join her, and I went on the train, and we had breakfast together that morning, and she gave me a beautiful gift, and I just really loved being in her company." And that gift that she mentioned there was these earrings, which you could see she was really enjoying wearing that day. And here we see Meghan getting out of the car as they arrived on their day of engagements, and you can see the blanket behind them. As we know from the Queen with others, one of the signs that she had for really welcoming someone into her embrace was sharing a blanket. Now this is an image from the Queen's Young Leaders Awards ceremony, and it was with young people from all around the Commonwealth. And I've chosen it because it's a symbol of the efforts really that the Queen went to try to choose areas that she thought Meghan would enjoy working with. And she thought, as an American coming from outside, she would enjoy the chance to embrace the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is something that was probably closest to the heart of the Queen. She felt very strongly about it, and she appointed Meghan and Prince Harry as ambassadors to it. And the whole thing ended up being quite sad, really, because at the time, Meghan and Harry thought it was wonderful. They were very keen to be involved. They had more than one role. But then later, like when they made their Netflix series, they had a long item about how sort of dreadful the Commonwealth was. They were associating it with imperialism and this type of thing. And it was a very negative view of the Commonwealth that, you know, would have really upset the Queen. And here we have a picture from Royal Ascot, which was an event of great importance to the Queen. She loved nothing more than Royal Ascot Week. We can see Harry and Meghan dressed appropriately there, and the keenness really on the Queen's face as she talks to Meghan, making sure she's okay, that she's enjoying things, presuming that the carriage drive was okay. And there was a day, I remember other members of the royal family didn't seem to be making such an effort perhaps with Meghan, but the Queen really was. So I think this is a sign of, even on a day where she's there just to relax and enjoy herself, she was making the effort to see that Meghan was happy. Now this is a really interesting picture. This is on Buckingham Palace balcony again. It was a centenary event of the RAF. But we can start to see tensions really. You know, you've seen how relaxed Meghan has looked in some of the previous photographs. Well, here she looks much more tense. I think the Queen was already aware of tensions behind the scenes between Meghan and Harry and William and Catherine. Apparently there'd been some petty arguments. There was one about presents at Easter or something like that. But I think it was news of these things was getting back to the Queen. But you can see typically she was ignoring this sort of thing. She was there putting on her usual straightforward, smiling, happy demeanour. But Meghan starts to look uncomfortable. And I think that was a sign of things to come. We now know that about this time, the Queen had stepped in to try to help Meghan resolve her dispute with her father. You know, things had got very bad at the time of the wedding, and they had started to become estranged. And Meghan had asked the Queen's advice, and the Queen had said to her that she really should travel to Mexico and visit her father and try and speak to him. And if she can't speak to him or on the phone, then to write a letter. So eventually Meghan did this. She wrote a long letter to him, but according to her father himself, it just made things much worse. He actually found the letter quite insulting. But what it does show is the Queen realising the importance of Meghan's relations with her family, you know, and how it could be a running sore, that she saw the problems that it could bring, and that indeed it did bring. So she was very wise in that respect. Now the Queen is not in this photograph, but it's an important one because it shows Meghan at Sandringham for Christmas again that year. And it was in fact the last time that she spent Christmas with the royal family. We all know how important that Sandringham gathering is to the royals and always was to the Queen. It's that big gathering of all the royal family together. Here they are meeting the crowds who come out after church. And it was a sign of unity, a show of unity. But behind the scenes, there'd been all sorts of disputes. And the Queen knew about these, but felt that it was important to try to get them together at least. And it showed the efforts that she was making. Now, this is a picture from the following year, 2019, which was probably the most important year of Harry and Meghan's time together in the royal family. We see them at an engagement. It was quite an important one. It was the 50th anniversary of the investiture of Charles as the Prince of Wales, and the Queen had gathered everyone together for this. You can see Meghan heavily pregnant with baby Archie. And it shows how she was still carrying out engagements, still invited to things, but it really was the beginning of the end. Now this picture was taken a short while later, and it's at the Commonwealth Day service, which was always an important day for the Queen because of her love of the Commonwealth. We see Meghan at the heart of the royal family there. Yes, behind William and Catherine, but she's there with Harry, right with the senior members of the royal family. Remember that Prince Charles, as he then was, his vision of the future of the royal family was himself and Camilla, both his sons with both their wives. That's what he thought the future was. And the Queen Elizabeth, was happy to go along with that. So they all felt that Meghan was there. She was going to play a very important role in the future of the royal family. Now this is a beautiful photograph. It's the official picture that was released after the birth of baby Archie. And you can see the Queen and Prince Philip coming to see him for the first time. They're pictured there with Meghan's mother, Doria. And the Queen was said to like Doria a great deal. She spent a bit of time with her at the wedding and after. And there she looks absolutely thrilled to be meeting her latest great-grandchild. People can forget, the affection that the Queen had for Prince Harry. He talks about himself as, sort of favourite grandson, but there's no doubt that she cared about him deeply and would have wanted him to be happy. So she was pleased that he was getting married, would have been delighted that he's had his first child. And people have said that the Queen was sad that Meghan's family was fractured, that her father wasn't able to share in those moments. And we know that he still hasn't met his grandchildren. And of course, he still hasn't met his son-in-law, Harry. They spoke to each other on the phone several times, but he's never actually met him. And that's said to be something that the Queen was sad about. Now, in this photograph, you'll notice that there is no Meghan. But that's why it's significant that it was the Christmas broadcast by the Queen in 2019. And you can see photographs there of William and Catherine, their family, and of Charles and Camilla, and of Philip, but not one of Harry and Meghan. Now, you might say, this is not significant at all. There's only space on her desk for certain photographs. But Harry later made clear that he felt it was a real snub. And it was something that, for him, came to symbolise that he wasn't seen as important in the royal family. To me, it does seem very petty and is a reflection of what we saw throughout his memoirs, that it was just sort of petty annoyance at very silly things. In his book Revenge, the author Tom Bower wrote, "To Harry's fury, there was no photograph of himself, Meghan and Archie. The Windsors were airbrushing the Sussexes from history." Wow, now a few weeks later we have this. This is when we had confirmation that Harry and Meghan would be quitting as working royals. Royal bombshell, the front page of the Daily Mail said, and my goodness, it really was. Despite the Queen's efforts to find a way to keep them within the royal family and, make best use of their talents, they had made clear that they wanted to leave. They didn't want to be full-time royals anymore. They suggested some way that they could be sort of part-time royals and earn money. But, we had the Sandringham Summit and the events that followed, and the Queen was making clear that no, they couldn't combine money-making with carrying out royal engagements. Now, this is a very significant photograph because it's really the last one that we see of Meghan in the same picture as the Queen. By that point, Harry and Meghan were living in Canada, but they came back for certain engagements and for the Commonwealth Day service that we see here with the rest of the royal family. But look how just angry, really, Harry looks there at the back. The others are trying to sort of put on very neutral expressions, but he looks angry and bitter. Everyone looks pretty unhappy, essentially, apart from, I dare say, Meghan. Look at the expression on her face. She seems kind of pleased, really, as if maybe she's got what she wanted. There were people at the time who said, perhaps that's what Meghan wanted. She's married into the royal family, she's got her prince, and now she's taking him back to America, which is what we see here. So maybe that accounts for her expression. Indeed, Meghan said on Netflix in her series, "We had left Westminster Abbey, and then that was it. Of course it was emotional." She also said, "I never wanted to upstage or ruffle any feathers, so I just tried to blend in. But I wore a lot of colour that week. I thought, well, let's just look like a rainbow." And once the couple had moved to California, we had the infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey and all its bombshells. Here we see the Daily Mail's 3:30 a.m. front page with the details of that interview. And, my goodness, it really was a a sensation. All the accusations against members of the royal family that Catherine had made her cry, these allegations of racism by unnamed members of the royal family. But when it comes to Queen Elizabeth, it's significant that Meghan didn't criticise her, quite the opposite. She went out of her way to be positive, talking about how she'd been welcomed by the Queen, and talk at length about how much respect and affection she had for her. But there's no doubt that regardless of that, the Queen would have been deeply upset and shocked by this interview because it was so damaging to the institution of the monarchy. According to the royal author Robert Jobson, the Queen was mystified by their behaviour, calling it quite mad. She thought her grandson's judgment was being distorted by the influence of his wife because he was so consumed by his love for her. My colleague Rebecca English reported at the time that Harry and Meghan's actions over the subsequent years left the Queen feeling very low indeed. Nevertheless, the Queen invited Harry and Meghan to her Platinum Jubilee celebrations in 2022. And here we see Harry and Meghan at the service at St Paul's of Thanksgiving for the Jubilee. It was the Queen's record-breaking 70th anniversary of her reign, so it's a very important event. But it's significant that we didn't see any photograph with the Queen. I think she made a point of not wanting to be photographed with them anymore. Here they are outside St Paul's. I remember seeing some footage of them waiting for cars with other members of the royal family, and it looked like no one really wanted to talk to them, frankly. They weren't invited to join the rest of the royals on the balcony at Buckingham Palace, and they weren't invited to other events while they were there, so it was quite a brief stay. But nevertheless, it was also the time of Lilibet, their second child's first birthday, and it was said that Meghan very much hoped to get a photograph of Lilibet with Queen Elizabeth because Lilibet had been named after the Queen. Lilibet is the pet family name for the Queen that was used by her father and other very close members of the family. According to Harry, it was a tribute to his grandmother, the name, but for other people it was insulting, and in fact the BBC reported that the Queen wasn't pleased about it, that she felt she hadn't been asked about it first, and that this was a cause of great dispute. Nevertheless, the fact is that the Queen wasn't pictured with Lilibet. She met her apparently, she visited Frogmore Cottage and said hello to her new great-grandchild, but didn't agree to any photograph being taken. Now that was the last meeting ever between the Queen and Meghan because the Queen died in September that year. Here we see Meghan at the funeral. What you might observe is those earrings, which we saw earlier that she was wearing on that happy, joyful day in Chester, where she'd been given those earrings as a gift. And here she's wearing them again in tribute to the Queen. Looking back through these photographs, the unprecedented steps the Queen took to make Meghan feel accepted into the royal family are clear. It is hard to imagine how the Queen felt about Meghan's later attacks on the monarchy. The Queen was her greatest ally, offering forgiveness and an olive branch where others didn't. Yet, without the Queen's guiding hand, it now falls to Meghan and the other royals to navigate their differences and find a way forward. We do know that Camilla had told friends at this point that she was surprised at the unexpected side to William that she had found. The boy's got a temper, she apparently said. One of them was born to be king. The other came to the royal family late in life, but has nevertheless become one of the key figures in the firm. Prince William and Queen Camilla might be close now, but it wasn't a straightforward path to get there, with rows and heartache and complaints of leaking stories along the way. In this programme, I'm going to look at that journey through some of the key moments that got us there and explain why theirs is one of the most important relationships for the British royal family and its future. Before we get into it, a reminder to please subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel for more fascinating royal content like this. Although Charles has known Camilla since 1970, William did not know her growing up. In fact, they first met in 1998, less than a year after Diana died. Camilla had firmly become part of Charles's life again, and he felt that it was time she met his sons. It was going to happen sooner or later, as William and Harry were planning a surprise party for their father's 50th in November. According to Camilla's biographer, Penny Junor, it started out as a party for the Prince's godchildren and their parents, and as Tom was Charles's godson, William realised he'd need to invite Camilla. It was time to meet her, he decided. Although he'd heard a lot of terrible things about her from his mother, who spared him little, he was beginning to realise that not everything he'd heard was entirely true. The meeting came sooner than planned, when William came home unexpectedly for the weekend from Eton. Camilla offered to leave, but Charles thought it right that they get it over with. He took her to the flat William had at Clarence House and left them to talk for half an hour. According to Penny Junor, at the end of the conversation, Camilla came out saying, "I need a drink." Despite the obviously difficult circumstances, it's thought that William had been friendly and Camilla had been sensitive about his feelings. They went on to meet again for lunch a few days later and enjoyed tea together too. Reports suggest that their meeting definitely didn't heal all the wounds, but made William realise that perhaps Camilla was far from the wicked stepmother figure as she had sometimes been portrayed. There was a twist, however. When newspapers revealed that the meeting had taken place, William was furious. Reports at the time suggested that he didn't trust his father's office. An investigation was launched and discovered that it was a private secretary of Camilla's who had accidentally leaked the story in an off-the-record conversation. The secretary in question resigned, but was later rehired. The first pictures of them together are these ones from 2002 at a Buckingham Palace concert to mark Queen Elizabeth's Golden Jubilee. Only they're not actually together. We can't know exactly what was being said, but it looks like Camilla is first looking over at Harry and Charles with William, and then she's trying to get their attention, actually waving to them. It's not clear if that's what's really going on, but it's an extraordinary set of pictures. Royal protocol and public opinion at the time would have made having Charles next to Camilla at this event impossible, however much Charles in particular might have wanted it. Charles also had to be sensitive to his son's wishes. We know more about this from Prince Harry's memoirs Spare. He later revealed more about his and William's view of Camilla. "Willie and I promised Pa that we'd welcome Camilla into the family," he wrote. "The only thing we asked in return was that he not marry her. You don't need to remarry, we pleaded. A wedding would cause controversy. It would incite the press. It would make the whole country, the whole world talk about Mummy, compare Mummy and Camilla, and nobody wanted that, least of all Camilla. We support you, we said. We endorse Camilla. Just please don't marry her. Just be together, Pa." It was a very sensitive, difficult time for Camilla because even though, she was the long-term girlfriend, well established with Charles, she often wasn't allowed to sit with him, particularly at big state occasions. And the final straw, by all accounts, came at a wedding at Chester Cathedral. It was one of the late Duke of Westminster's daughters, and Queen Elizabeth was there, and Prince Philip, and lots of senior members of the royal family. And protocol dictated that Camilla had to be seated far back, far away from Charles. And according to some reports at the time, Camilla put her foot down at this point and said, "This is ridiculous, I can't go on like this." Neither she nor Charles ended up attending that wedding, and they announced their engagement soon after. 3 years later from those photographs at the concert, the boys are now adults themselves when Charles finally married Camilla in a civil ceremony at Windsor. There had been huge debate over whether Charles, who was the future Supreme Governor of the Church of England, should be allowed to remarry. But there was a strong argument that insisting he stay unmarried with Camilla as a mere companion caused huge problems too. We now know how important Camilla is to Charles, and he did what many of us would want to do, that is, put a ring on it. The formal portrait is a lovely photograph. Everyone knows they've got to look their best and smile for the camera. There would have been some relief, I think, from Camilla that the service was over with. The pictures outside the event are probably more instructive. Here, William and Harry look almost too happy, giddy even. It's as though they're getting through the challenge of the day by joking with each other. This would have been a very hard day for William and his brother, particularly to have to do it while the world looked on. But despite the bad feeling that undoubtedly lingered, and we know it did from Harry's memoirs, one of the key moments here was this grainy photo of William greeting the bride. his new stepmother, with a kiss. It was the Mail's front page the next day. Wills's kiss for Camilla. As we discussed in my programme about Catherine and Meghan, you can tell lots by how royals greet each other. Catherine kissed Meghan on the cheek at Westminster Abbey to try to reset relations, and I think this is a sign from a younger William that despite everything, he has accepted Camilla into the family. Royal life thrust the key figures together in very formal and very public circumstances, so it was unsurprising that a few months after the wedding, we saw William and Camilla together again. This picture was taken at the Cenotaph for the annual Remembrance Service, a key event for the royal family. We can't expect a happy mood here, but the body language is uncomfortable. Camilla, who was from a military family, would have understood this event instinctively, but she was relatively new to big public engagements, and although charming and outgoing, wouldn't have had the public confidence that a similarly aged royal might have done. Also, William was more of a reluctant royal in those days, and much more self-conscious. He was a long way from the self-confident heir to the throne we know now. As Penny Junor writes in one of her books on Camilla, to the nation, it may have looked as though all was quickly forgiven and forgotten, but it took many years for William to warm to Camilla. Meanwhile, the public had to warm to Camilla. Part of this process was to have her seen out with the boys. Junor quotes one of those involved in rehabilitating Camilla's image. Part of the thinking was that in order for the public to approve of Camilla, she had to be seen with the boys or it wouldn't work. I think the relationship between them all is warm now, but if I'm honest, it wasn't then. I think they found it hard. Things were definitely warming between William and the then Duchess of Cornwall. She is seen here at the heart of royal action at a firework display for the Queen's 80th birthday. Here William and Camilla, with close family nearby, seem to be happily chatting away. This was held at London's beautiful Kew Gardens, and frankly, who wouldn't be happy to be right at the heart of this historic occasion in these beautiful surroundings? Harry complains in his memoirs Spare that Camilla was on the charm offensive with William because he was the heir, while she was bored with Harry. Maybe he just wasn't making the same effort. Although they were now married, Camilla was still viewed with suspicion by some of the royals, the media and the public. These times would have had some very hard moments for Camilla. As she wrote in Vogue to mark her own 75th birthday, "It's not easy. I was scrutinised for such a long time that you just have to find a way to live with it. Nobody likes to be looked at all the time and, criticised. But I think in the end, I sort of rise above it and get on with it. You've got to get on with life." Things seem less than warm here at a Thanksgiving service for the Queen in September 2006. A very serious looking William here. The interaction feels formal and possibly forced. While we don't know the exact context of this picture, we do know that Camilla had told friends at this point that she was surprised at the unexpected side to William that she had found. "The boy's got a temper," she apparently said. In Robert Lacey's book, Battle of the Brothers, he writes, "Camilla had been horrified by the ranting and raving that William could unleash on occasions against her husband, letting rip with no apparent inhibition in her presence. The rows had been earth-shattering, by her account, with William doing the shouting and Charles submitting meekly. In William's kingdom, everything had to be perfect," the author continued. "And if his father has failed in some way to live up to his elder son's elevated view of what being royal entails, the young man would release his fury." Because of their increasingly senior positions in the family, William and Camilla were often together at official events when William was back from military duties. These pictures of the pair sharing a carriage were taken at Trooping the Colour in 2007, 2009 and 2010. The atmosphere seems convivial. It's not warm, but it's not cold either. Both know the importance of getting on. It reminded me of an argument made by Penny Junor in The Duchess, The Untold Story. This was made before Megxit, of course. She writes that after Diana's death, William and Harry could have badly lost their way. There was no certainty that they'd turn into such well-grounded, responsible, likeable young men, or that they'd embrace their unenviable destiny. Camilla could have driven a wedge between father and sons. Instead, she was the glue that has kept them together. While keeping Harry in the fold was probably well beyond her or anyone's abilities, I think that her stabilising, but no-nonsense presence has probably only helped bring Charles and William back closer together over the years. This shot might not suggest much about the pair, but it would have been a reminder to William and the rest of the royals of Camilla's place. This is the balcony shot for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012, where the King stripped everything back So joining Her Majesty was Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine and Harry. There is not much interaction here, they're quite spread out. Charles is sticking tightly to Camilla, who probably feels a bit exposed here. The backstory is fascinating. These five and their descendants were the future of the royal family as far as Charles was concerned. Camilla and Catherine were key to that. Camilla had been undertaking more engagements than the younger royals, who had been on military duties and taking time almost to find themselves before the real royal work began. Prince Andrew was said to be angry and Prince Edward disappointed at missing out. This was Charles making a key point that he wanted Camilla to be queen, and this is how he saw the future of the royal family. This is one of my favourite pictures from today's programme. The occasion is the opening ceremony of the first Invictus Games in London in 2014. William was sitting with Camilla and Charles for the occasion, and for whatever reason they're just in fits of laughter. The royals are used to everything working like clockwork. The engagements they go to are sometimes planned years in advance, and while this means they can do a lot, it can be a bit boring. So when something does go wrong, it can really tickle them. You don't really laugh like this and look at someone like this if you're not close. It's also a reminder that while Harry was a key driver for the Invictus Games, William in particular and the rest of the royals were also involved in its formation and really did get behind the event. Despite these smiles here, it has been suggested that there were further conflicts down the road. Prince Harry writes of one episode in 2019 where he says his brother was seething. This was because he claims Pa and Camilla's people had planted a story or stories about him and Kate and the kids, and he wasn't going to take it anymore. Give Pa and Camilla an inch, he said, they take a mile. This was a significant moment. William greeting Camilla warmly at the Commonwealth Day service. What gave the occasion a particular importance was that it came after the late Queen Elizabeth gave her blessing that Camilla should be known as Queen when Charles took the throne. This was a hugely important moment for the royals after the years-long controversy over Charles's relationship with Camilla and the supposed unhappiness on William and Harry's side. However, William was said to be supportive of the decision, and this kiss, again a public embrace, is often significant with the royals, helped to allay any fears that William wasn't happy with the decision. A well-placed source told my colleague Rebecca English at the time there were huge family rows in the early stages of Charles and Camilla's marriage, as everyone found their feet. William didn't have the best relationship with his father back then, but he sees that Camilla had made his father happy, and it is something he has come to terms with. His relationship with the Prince of Wales is better than it ever has been. He is not particularly close to his stepmother, but they get on perfectly well and are quite the blended family now. He also respects his grandmother and her judgment more than anything in the world. If it is right for her, then it will be right for him. This next picture, I think, shows one of the key people responsible for William's rapprochement with Camilla and his father. It is, of course, William's wife, Catherine. This was taken at the welcoming ceremony for the South African president, who was arriving on a state visit. You can see here the warmth and friendliness between Catherine and Camilla, two future queens. Catherine would have been grateful to Camilla too, after she gave her some important advice early on in her relationship with William. According to Robert Lacey in his book Battle of the Brothers, Camilla had confided to Kate the secret of hanging on to a busy prince. Fit your timetable, well basically your whole life, around his. Catherine obviously took that advice and helped make William the happy prince he is today. 10 years on from the last picture of William and Camilla giggling, I'm pleased to report that they're still laughing. This is maybe the most touching of all the images we're looking at today, and it shows the journey that they have both been on. This is from March 2024, and while both William and Camilla would have expected to be at Commonwealth Day, neither would have expected to have to do it without their spouses. Yet with both the King and Catherine undergoing treatment for cancer, Camilla and William had to shoulder the responsibility for this one themselves. Despite the stress and uncertainty both were facing, they were both able to share a huge laugh. It almost looks like a release as much as anything. They would both have been very grateful to have the other there. It might have taken William longer to appreciate Camilla, but it's rare to laugh like this with someone you don't care about. They had both suffered the outrageous barbs launched at them by Harry and Meghan in their books and interviews. That could have divided them, but it only made them stronger. William will respect the fact that well into her 70s, Camilla is having to work harder than ever. I hope you enjoyed that look back at an extraordinary quarter of a century in the lives of two fascinating figures. A reminder to please subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel for more great royal content like this and Palace Confidential. I'll see you next time on Reading the Royals.